Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to Presence. I am Doug King, and this is a special podcast that I'm doing as a memorial to my dad, Max King, and his life and legacy. And I really do appreciate everybody joining me for this. Let me just say at the outset, thank you to everyone for the tremendous outpouring of love and support that you've given to our family and in memory of Dad. Thank you to everyone. And as I go through this will be my specific thoughts. And there are so many of you that have been involved over the years and continue to be involved that there's no way I could get to every one of you like I would like to. Your names, what you've done, how you've contributed. So I just want to say thanks to everyone. And also that, this is some of the thoughts that I've got. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone else in our family, not for Mom, not for my brothers. These are just my views. They have theirs and certainly their own stories and different things that they have as memories. So I'm not taking it upon myself to speak for anyone else's voice, anyone else's memories. I'm just using this Presence podcast platform to share with most of you who are in Presence, and then even all of you who may be part of the extended family. I've heard from a lot of you. And again, I cannot mention everybody's name because I'd end up with an 8-hour podcast. So just thanks to everybody in our family, extended family, the Presence family. Thank you to everyone. And I guess if you're going to do a memorial, you should start with the fact that Max Ray King was born March the 30th, 1930, in a farmhouse in the hills of West Virginia, just as his other 3 siblings were also born in a farmhouse. Those were the life conditions in which he grew. He is survived by his wife, Novella, his 4 sons, myself, Randy, Jay, and Tim, as well as 10 grandchildren, 9 great-grandchildren. When you think about Dad growing up in that environment, he was that guy who walked a mile, not to school. He walked a mile just to get the school bus. And it didn't matter, rain, snow, which they had a lot of in those mountains, or shine. That was his life. They did not have electricity. He talked of doing his homework by kerosene lamp, and how they would have to use wood burning stoves and those kinds of things to heat water out in the wash house where there'd be the big tubs. You had to heat the water for everyone to get a bath or do the laundry. He was raised in an environment of one-room schoolhouses where you might have the first 6 grades all in one big open space, one-room church buildings. And his parents, my grandparents, of course, worked the farm for sustenance. It was their food. It was their clothing. It served all of their needs. On a farm, every day was a work day. Work defined life. Work was the primary ethic of people who lived in the hills. In fact, Dad's mom would do all of her work, not only in the house and the cooking and all those other things that you tend to, but she also had a large garden out by the house that she worked. And the thing about having a little one is there weren't any daycares, there were no neighbors. And so when you have a little one, you do things like put them in a basket or a carrier and you go working down the garden, doing your thing, and bring the little one along. That's an isolated life. Dad didn't grow up with neighbor kids. And because they were so isolated, Dad really, for the first 5 years of his life, had very little interaction with other kids. And when he went to the first grade, he had trouble. He stuttered and he had difficulty in not just communicating, but also in learning. They weren't sure the degree to which he might have some issues or problems. And so he was actually held back in the first grade. And think about that. Here's a guy who later on became such an avid reader, learner, and speaker later in life. And yet, this is how he started as a child. But as he learned, he did well in school. He did well in high school. One of the memories that he shared with all of us in the family is that he was the president of the local chapter there at high school of the Future Farmers of America, the FFA. And he entered and won a state essay contest and was selected to go to the national meeting of the FFA in Kansas City. He had a teacher that was very much a supporter and a mentor to him, and that teacher took him. They drove all the way to Kansas City from West Virginia, and I'm sure that was the first time Dad had been anywhere near that far from the farm. A story that he relates to the family is how he was there for that convention, and his teacher said that they were going to go visit a farm that was a model of some of the latest farming technology. You have to remember, he grew up on a farm where you had 2 horses and they pulled the plow, they pulled the wagon, they did the work. That was literal horsepower that they had. That was their technology. So they got to this farm and they met the owner there and had good talk with him. And he said, "Why don't you come down and see my prize bull?" And apparently he had paid a considerable sum of money, especially in those days and in those times. And when they got down to where he kept the bull, he asked my dad if he would to go ahead and open the gate. And when my dad attempted to do that, he received a significant shock, literally, a literal shock. And it was shocking that he got it because he had never encountered something called an electric fence. And the owner just put his head back and roared in laughter, thought it was the funniest thing. And it so happens that the owner of that farm and some other farms as well was none other than J.C. Penney. And that was the story of my dad meeting and having some experiences with J.C. Penney. So at any rate, he went to Magnolia High School in New Martinsville. It was there that he met Novella Jean Beagle, who was the daughter of C.D. Beagle, a preacher in the Ohio Valley. And the yearbook the Magnolia Yearbook predicted that she would someday be queen of the King family. And in fact, that prediction came true in every possible way. Mom was the mainstay of Dad's life. They were married 72 years. When he passed, it would have been 73 this September. And yes, Dad would say that he would have gone nowhere without her support. What's interesting about both of them, and a sign of the times in which they grew up, was that neither of them went to college. And it was because, first of all, with Dad, his teacher, who was such, again, a mentor for him, actually came out to the farm and talked to his dad, my grandfather, about sending him to West Virginia University. But Dad had two older brothers, Russell and Lloyd, and my grandfather thought that since he had not sent them to college, it wouldn't be fair for him to send Dad. So Dad didn't go to college. And Mom, on the other hand, had two brothers, Dean and Edgar. And while they went to college, her dad, CD, thought that Mom would have a path and journey typical of most women in their day and in their religious culture, of taking her place as a housewife and homemaker, and that it would not be of real value for Mom to go to college. Both Mom and Dad would have done really well. Again, Mom, as well as Dad, was a avid reader, and Mom did real well when she went back to work after the four of us were older. She worked in a stock brokerage firm and, again, had the capabilities to do a number of things. So Dad took a job out of high school working for the county. He was making use of his background, his farming background, his experience from FFA. But at the same time, on Sundays, he would make talks at the local church. If you weren't a full-time preacher, you might be a young person who, quote, made a talk. And so, because his little church did not have a full-time preacher, he would make talks at that church. And then that led to other small churches throughout that mountain community inviting him to speak as well. And it so happened that at one of those venues, there was an elder who was part of the decision-making process for a larger church in Parkersburg, where they had more than one traffic light. A larger church in Parkersburg was impressed. And one thing led to another, and Dad was hired to become a full-time preacher, a full-time minister. And from there, he became a popular speaker at gospel meetings. Some denominations call it revivals. Dad held a number of those. It was a way to supplement income at that time. And those gospel meetings would last anywhere from a week to 10 days. And you went every single night without question. So after having begun in the Ohio Valley and West Virginia, he received notice by some people in northeastern Ohio, Warren, Ohio, to be specific, and moved the family to Warren in 1962. So Dad began ministry there. And while there in Warren, in addition to preaching, he did carpentry of all types. He built houses, he made furniture. He was a tremendous craftsman. He was excellent. And he was a perfectionist. You can ask my brothers because they, far more than me, worked with him in the summers as a way of making money to put all of us through college. And really, if you think about it, that's pretty amazing that on that preacher's salary, he used his skills to do that, to put 4 kids through college. He was so good, he could have made a business out of it. He had to turn business down. His work was so good. One of the other things, though, that really always impressed me about Dad was he could spend hours, literally hours, at his desk studying the scriptures. He could go in his study in the morning and he could study all day long. And this was especially true when he started writing. He published his first book, The Spirit of Prophecy, in 1971. And he knew, and he told the family, that there would be repercussions because he was taking up viewpoints that went against the denomination in which we were all raised. And sure enough, when that book came out, we were immediately cut off and isolated from all the other congregations of that denomination. It had a cost. Dad was willing to take the cost, pay the cost. Why? Because he would say over and over again, his study of the scripture was that he wanted answers for himself, that he could not, quote, leave things alone just because they were problematic. And there was more than one preacher who gave him that advice to leave certain things alone. Why? Well, it cost your job. Dad's advice to all of us was just remember, you only answer to God. You don't answer to other humans. And you have to follow that mantra. And so he did. But his study didn't stop. I mean, he published Spirit of Prophecy in 71. And then he came into contact because I was graduated with a double major in theology and biblical languages. I went on to graduate school and I brought some of my books home. He began reading these books that I was reading in grad school. And he not only read the books, he would sit down with me and explain to me where these particular theologians were having problems, where they were running into a wall, how they had to write all around a problem and never really get to an answer to it. If you look at his bibliography of Cross and Parousia, a book which was published in 1987, you see that that bibliography was full of people who were in that theological world from a variety of different backgrounds. So he was very analytical, and he would hold a problem until eventually it gave way. He got that advice from one Albert Einstein, who he really admired. Dad also critiqued his own work. He questioned his answers. He tried to look at the things he had seen from every possible angle. And by doing that, he got to a place where when he was at peace that he had the answer, he would only then go on. The last book he published most recently was the book Irrevocable, and that's because he saw, even in the Cross and Parousia, that he was on a trajectory. He felt he was moving deeper and deeper into the understanding of an all in all God. not a God who is all in some. And that led him to his book on Romans 9 through 11, Irrevocable, a book that I think really is a representation of the apex of his studies. Along the way, of course, he came to know many of you over the years. Again, I just can't do justice to mentioning all the names of those of you who've been part of this movement. Continue to email me, call me, text, Zoom. And so I sat and I started thinking about Dad's legacy. And the first thing I began to think about was how his legacy related directly to our family and how his legacy related to his 4 sons. Randy was second in age to me, and Randy is the one who really got the carpentry skills from Dad. And Randy used them as ministry. Randy was known as the person who would come out whenever someone had a problem, needed repairs, needed something rebuilt, they were working on a project. Randy would gladly go and help people. I can remember there were some times when the city of Houston, where he and Diane and the family lived, where they had flooding. Randy was one of the first people to put on that tool belt and get his tools and go out and help people as just part of a ministry. And after Randy came Jay. Jay also worked with Dad in building houses, but Jay really played a role in the realm of the heart, I guess you'd say, as far as the huge role that he played in Mom and Dad's care, looking after them, making sure they had everything they need. As a matter of fact, Jay and Linda had talked to Danae and me for a couple of years on and off about the possibility of moving Mom and Dad from here in Atlanta back up to Northeast Ohio so that they could spend their final years at home where they had lived most of their lives, back in Northeast Ohio. And Jay and Linda had kids, grandkids, a lot of family around. So they moved them back up there. Jay took them on their doctor's appointments. He went and got their medicine. Linda and the kids would take food, visit. So Jay passed on that legacy of trying to do something with your life to contribute to other people. And Tim brought a focus to Dad's work using various communication platforms to spread Dad's work in ways Dad never would. You would not find Dad on the internet, in social media, joining in the fray, the fighting, the judging, the condemning. And so Tim realized that, yes, these are fantastic books and this is great stuff that Dad's putting out. How can it get as far as possible to as many as possible? So it was Tim who had the idea to start Presence. Tim's idea to start Presence conferences and even the Living Presence journals and magazines, things Dad never would have done. And actually, it was Tim who introduced me to spiral dynamics and the field of integral consciousness. So as I think about my 3 brothers and I think about Dad, I have some really positive memories of things that we all drew from him in the field of service to others. And I have to mention this, that along the way, Mom and Dad also became very close to Robert Costa. Robert, who still calls my mom, Mom. You know, when Jay got Mom and Dad back up to Northeastern Ohio, they went into assisted living. And Robert, as a philanthropist who was a very faithful and continues to be faithful supporter of Presence, helping us to spread this word in every way possible, Robert made sure Mom and Dad got the best possible assisted living space. And especially for Dad in his later years, he was on a particular wing for memory care. Dad's memory was failing, and the care for that was quite extensive. So Robert is not only the chairman of our advisory board, Robert is family. The same is true for his wife, Rita, his daughter, Amanda, and her husband, Jai, have come here to the States with their children, Robbie and Lily. So it really did become and has become a family affair. And while Robert was the chairman of our advisory board, we have also been very blessed with others who have been a tremendous support to Dad's work on that advisory board. There's Dr. John Trapp right here in Atlanta. There's Rob Hunter and Carolyn up there in Montana. There's Riley and her family over in Arizona. There's Dave Levine up in Canada. There's Sonny Boy Skosana in South Africa with his delightful wife, Sibo. And there's Marcus Moseman in Switzerland, making up our advisory board. Dad's life and his work continues on as Presence. Presence continues to build on his work, to expand his work into a global conversation. That is our tagline, a global conversation for a new earth. And as I thought about that and Dad's legacy as far as Presence went, one story that I thought would be best to share in this limited time is the one from 2015, when I was invited to speak at the United Nations in New York. The United Nations, once a year, invites their non-governmental organizations. These are organizations sanctioned by the UN to work with the UN, to come there and work in breakout groups. And I was on a panel invited to come by one of the NGOs with them and some others and speak on a panel. And so there I was at the UN, and I was speaking, and I was introduced by Dr. Kurt Johnson, evolutionary biologist who was on the panel. And I was introduced as the son of theologian Max King. And Kurt, who literally came to Atlanta and had met Mom and Dad and is well aware of the Presence approach and how we see it as tying into the sciences. Kurt made sure that everyone knew that Max King was a leading edge theologian who was seeing things that really were the future of where an integrated, meaning an all in all God, was going. So I shared this with Dad. I said, Dad, just think of this. Here you are growing up in the hills of West Virginia. You had no electricity, no technology, no communication. You become a preacher in the hills of West Virginia, move up here to Northeast Ohio, and I'm in a meeting at the United Nations, and they're they're mentioning your name. Well, knowing Dad, of course, he was complimentary, excited. Wow, that's really something. But I never heard him tell the story after that. And even when we were talking, it didn't take long for him to change the subject to something else. He just wasn't a self promoter. He was all in on the message, not the man. I remember being there at the UN and talking about the Abrahamic traditions, which control the better part of the planet in terms of the number of people who follow Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and talking about the two-tier promise to Abraham, with the first tier starting in the particularistic and the second tier moving to the universal, that it went from a promise of a great nation only as a start, a beginning, but it led to the ultimate blessing. And that was the promise that through you, Abraham, I will bless all nations. And how in John's Revelation, the story ends when John sees a vision that all nations walk in the light of a new paradigm, symbolized metaphorically by a new Jerusalem. And all these nations walking in the light is a message for the people there at the United Nations, united in a universe by a universal God. And all of that came from the work of Max R. King. And then from that, Presence has been invited into the Evolutionary Leaders Movement. I've put information about this out through the Presence newsletter. You can find them at evolutionaryleaders.net, evolutionaryleaders.net. Right now, there are 240 authors, leaders, internationally known speakers who are part of this movement, who are joining together to co-author more books, establish synergy circles. They have their own publishing. They produce videos. Why did they invite me? Why did they invite me to be part of the Evolutionary Leaders Movement when I'm some guy talking about the Bible? It's because our approach to the biblical narrative is an approach that they see blending beautifully with the nature of quantum physics, evolutionary biology, psychology, philosophy, education. All these things have grown from the early seeds of Dad's work and are now expanded into global conversations with people from all parts of this planet. And we have actually put a new tab on our website called Global Conversations. And this year, I will be having conversations with people from all those different fields and relating it to the biblical narrative. Mom and Dad have been always supportive of all of this and excited for what we're doing and supportive of me. The last conversation I had with Dad, he thanked me for all this work. And of course, I always told him, well, I'd have no work to do if it wasn't for you. If time permitted, I could go on and talk about so much support that had come our way. One of the groups that we met with year after year after year was our good friends in Baytown, Texas, who hosted conferences year after year. Rick and Paula and Roy and Betsy and Bob and Ann and so many of you. And again, I know there are a lot of you down there, and I know you. I spoke there. I spoke with you. And I don't want to leave anybody out, but those are people who had the courage to also pay the cost of being castigated for going outside the boundaries of their denomination. And as I thought about this, there's a lot of you out there who may be listening who have worked with Presence in the past. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for all you contributed. All of you now who continue on, who support us, thank you so much for your support, for everything you've done. And one thing I'll say here is I've had calls from people about what can I do in your dad's memory? Well, Dad's legacy is being carried on and through Presence. We don't have anything official set up, but if you want to do something in Dad's memory, if you want to show your appreciation for everything that's being done, you can go to our website, and right there you'll see a donate button, and you can donate to Presence. We will be using this money, as we always do, purely for bringing people into Atlanta, or for me traveling to go to conferences where I'm making presentations to people that the Christian community never talks to. I'm taking the biblical narrative places that the Christian community never goes outside the walls of their church buildings. And it's because their message is purely for their particularistic denominated crowd. And I appreciate everything Dad did to free Jesus from being institutionalized and helping this word of God go internationally. So these are the main thoughts that came to mind as I put this together, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of things that I'll think of that I could have, should have said maybe. But at any rate, one final thanks to all of you. And on behalf of all of us, I say, Dad, thank you for a life well lived, for your dedication, for your courage, and for your legacy that will go on for a long time and continue to grow and expand. And from here, well, you'll get a newsletter, and we'll keep in touch about our next steps, our next podcasts, and so forth. So until then, God bless every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.